The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
State Representative Kevin Windham made history in 2018 when he was elected as the youngest African American to the Missouri House. And now the Hillsdale Democrat is trying to make his mark on the 2019 legislative session. Windham joins us on the latest edition of Politically Speaking, so let's hit the music.
This is Politically Speaking, the longest-running episodic podcast about Missouri politics.
It's a little complicated in Bolivar because there is a Parsons family there.
But we also knew that it was important to make sure that we got to where we needed to go.
You know, if you walk in a room and you're getting ready to make a decision and everybody in the room looks like you need to stop.
And right now what happens in the United States Senate is as critical as anywhere else in the country.
I really want the state to succeed.
Well, we want everybody to know that we're all working together.
I just worked hard to try to build my name where I didn't have the money.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today, a longtime fan of the show. Apparently, whenever a new episode comes on, he literally exclaims in the hall of the Capitol about how excited he is. Our guest today is
Kevin Windham, State Representative of Missouri's 85th House District.
Welcome. First-time guest today. This is why you ran for office, right, to be on the show?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You are the youngest African-American ever elected to the Missouri House, so there has to be an interesting backstory about how you got to this point as a state legislator.
Well, I don't know how interesting it is, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I was raised in a small municipality in the Normandy area, Hillsdale. And when I was growing up, I went to a few different schools, but ended up graduating from McClure North High School because I know that's an important St. Louis question.
Well, Joe Manis usually asks that question, but I'm not from St. Louis, so I don't really care as much.
We miss you, Joe.
We do. She'll be back eventually, but continue.
So after graduating from McClure North High School, I went on to study corporate communications at Southeast Missouri State. Well, I should rewind just a little bit. I went into college as a finance major, and then during 2014, the Ferguson uprising occurred, and I had a different outlook on life. I started thinking more about how do I move both myself and my community forward, more so than just myself. So I changed my major to corporate communication and became engaged in student government and Black Student Union, the President's Task Force on Diversity Education at the university. After college, or actually during college, I participated in the Focus St. Louis Impact Fellows, where I met a bunch of great executive leaders in the region. From there, I participated in the Neighborhood Leadership Fellows and worked for Senator McCaskill in Washington, D.C.
And what did you do for Senator McCaskill?
So I was a staff assistant in D.C. and St. Louis. The role changed a little bit when I came to St. Louis, but I was basically the guy that did everything that no one else wanted to do. So after I came back to St. Louis, I started looking inward and saying and thinking that I could have a bigger role on the change that I wanted to make. So I determined to go ahead and run for office after a bunch of different conversations with mentors and the like. And it was a tumultuous run. I think it stayed clean during the campaign, but it was still quite the campaign.
I was just going to say, you ran against, what, 3 other Democratic candidates?
That's right.
Including
that's right.
The closest one was Errol Bush, who I believe was the mayor of Northwoods.
That's right.
And he has been in local politics for a long time, happens to be Cori Bush's father.
Right.
Actually was a longtime ally of Congressman Lacy Clay. I assume that since his daughter was running against Lacy Clay, he was probably more on your side than his side. Is that fair to say? Or did he not really care about your race that much?
I won't say that he didn't care much about the race, because it was a race that I mean, it's within his district, right? So
Yeah.
it had some influence on his constituents in the district. I don't know if those outside factors, those personal things, really had much of a factor on my race or on the race for the 85th seat specifically. But I do think that within the race, I was able to garner a significant amount of support, whether that was other political folks or whether it was organizations or, most importantly, my neighbors, right?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of a generational race. Similar to, we had Rachel Prouty on, and she ran against two older candidates, one who had been in municipal office before and one who tried to get in municipal office before. I think one of your candidates was kind of youngish, but so it wasn't exactly the same. But was the fact that you're a fairly young political figure like attractive to a lot of people and a lot of voters? Because in a race with four Democrats who have probably fairly similar views on issues, that could be a determining factor in how they vote.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think the youth combined with the experience of so many of the candidates that have been running lately is not only plus, but I think that is something for that constituents really look to these days. So I even though it wasn't necessarily politics wasn't necessarily my first choice, it came earlier in my career, and I was able to kind of take steps towards my eventual path in politics, whether it was policy or whether it was just those leadership programs or diversity programs. That experience eventually added up to the constituents of the district to make a good public policy maker.
So you've been a state house member for what, 3-4 months now?
3 months.
Time has flown by since the 2018 election cycle. What are your overall impressions of being in the Missouri House? I think this is my observation. The African American members of the House seem to be having some success in getting their bills heard, which we'll talk about in a bit. You're still in the super minority, which means that it's not going to be super easy to pass everything you want. But it does seem like at least your voices are being heard by Republican leadership. That's my observation. What's your first person observation?
I think that that the Black Caucus has shown some strength in the early in the early part of this legislature. The Speaker, Elijah Har, has, of course, shown the willingness to refer some bills to committee. But if you look at the representation of African Americans in the Democratic caucus leadership, and it seems like it's an article about this nearly every year, but the Democratic leadership has the most African American members in history. I'm the first incoming freshman to be in leadership. It's just we've kind of moved to, I think, a point where it's more so about policy and making strong policy for the state of Missouri than it is about, I won't necessarily say than it is about party, but hopefully in the future it'd be more so about policy than it is about race when making policy.
I don't want to be a conspiratorial theorist or conspiracy theorist. I don't think conspiratorial theorist is the right term.
I'll allow it.
Do you think that the Speaker is engaging with the Black Caucus because he may need your votes on some controversial issues like charter schools or Clean Missouri or something? He doesn't need your votes for Clean Missouri, which is the state legislative redistricting, but he clearly would want it to have some Democratic votes as opposed to being a Republican thing. Is there any of that going into play there, or do you think it's just you have good ideas and good ideas just win the day, basically?
Well, of course, I wouldn't be able to say for sure, but there could be some political gamesmanship there. There has been in the past. There usually is amongst the majority party, or even sometimes the Democratic caucus and the Black Caucus. But at the end of the day, I strongly believe that folks are, whether in the Black Caucus or whether in the Democratic Caucus, are going to vote with their district and vote with their conscience.
One of the bills that has been heard involves the A+ schools program. I want you to explain, first of all, what that program is for listeners that don't understand what it is, and also what your legislation would do, because this does seem to have some bipartisan support. A Republican sponsored a very similar, if not identical, bill. So what does this bill do? What is the A-plus program, and what are you trying to change?
Absolutely. So House Bill 498, the provisions, it modifies provisions to the A-plus program. The A-plus program is, in my opinion, marketed as free college or free 2 years of community college. And it is actually not that for a lot of students. At least 2,500 students do not receive I'm using air quotes, what we call free college because it is what we call a last dollar program. So a last dollar program means that all non-loan sources of funding will pay for your school, and then A-plus will kick in. So if you are a low-income student and you receive Pell Grants, your Pell Grant will likely take up all the costs of your community college education before it even comes to A-plus. Now, some folks will say, well, that still sounds okay to me. It's still quote-unquote free college. However, if a student decides to go to a 4-year university after their community college education and uses a large amount of their Pell Grant funding, then they won't have their full amount of Pell Grant funding available to them. So, in my opinion, A-plus is inherently inequitable, and House Bill 498, which Representative Don Mayhew, a Republican from rural Missouri, filed the exact same bill, and we had the hearing together. It would make A-plus a first dollar program. So if you're promised A-plus and you complete all the requirements for A-plus, you'll receive those A-plus dollars before you receive any Pell Grant or federal aid.
Do you know how much an average A-plus scholarship is? Is it like $2,000, $3,000 or something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the idea is that if you use that money first, then you could potentially not use as much Pell Grants toward the community college and have some left over for the 4-year college. Is that basically what you're trying to do here?
That's right.
Has there been any major opposition to the idea? It seems like a pretty reasonable idea on its face, but why hasn't this been done many years ago?
Well, I can't tell you why it hasn't been done many years ago, but I can tell you that some of the opposition to it, surprisingly, is the Missouri Community College Association. And one of the reasons that not only the Community College Association, but some of the opponents of the bill is the fiscal note. But in my opinion, the fiscal note, which is about $12 million, just shows the true cost of A-plus. The recipients of A-plus, the average income for those students, or the average household income, is about $85,000, and over 30% of the recipients of the A-plus scholarship have a household income of over $100,000. So I think that it's many different ways to try to look at the program and right-size it or revamp it, whatever words you want to use. But I think that we have to look at ourselves as a state and think, who are we helping and who are we not helping with a lot of our aid programs.
Has this been voted on in committee yet, or did you just have a hearing?
It has not been voted on. It's had a public hearing, but we haven't had executive session yet.
Any guesses on how it'll do and whether it'll make it to the floor, or whether you may just have to attach it as an amendment to another bill or something like that? Where does it go from here?
Honestly, I don't want to make any guesses.
You don't want to give away your legislative strategy on a podcast, basically?
Well, I won't say that. It's just me and you talking in a room, right? But I'll say that this one is up in the air. I think that a lot of folks agree that it's good policy, but I think that one of the quickest ways to kill a bill in Missouri is talking about the fiscal note.
Okay. Well, there was another, before we pressed record, there was another bill that went through a committee that you're on, the local elections and elected officials committee, dealing with, I guess, voting and felonies. Is if I'm not mistaken? This isn't. I don't think this is a bill that you've sponsored. I think State Representative Bruce Franks Jr. has sponsored it, but it's something that has piqued your interest. Explain what it does and how it was received in that committee.
Absolutely. So I am honored to serve on the Elections and Elected Officials Committee, and we heard a bill by Representative Franks, and it deals with probation and parole and voting rights. So Representative Frank's bill would restore voting rights while folks are on probation and parole. And it really piqued my attention, not only because I had a almost heart-wrenching, or it was a heart-wrenching story on the campaign trail where I knocked on a person's door and we had a great conversation about politics, and then they told me that they couldn't vote because they weren't on probation, even though their kids were going to the school district and even though they were involved in local politics. So that would restore folks' voting rights while they're on probation and parole. And another reason that especially caught my attention is because I recently heard about a story of a woman named Crystal Mason in Texas that had been sentenced to 5 years for voting while she was on probation, in which she said it was a mistake. So I think that's especially important, especially when we're talking about getting more folks involved in the political process.
You know, one of the things that has been interesting to watch as somebody who followed the post-policy push after Ferguson is I think Republicans now are more amenable to quote-unquote criminal justice reform as they were in 2015, where all they wanted to do was basically restrict the amount of fine revenue that municipalities could get and nothing else. Is this something that you think your Republican colleagues could get behind? Because there does seem to be this new wave within the conservative libertarian movement of restorative justice and giving people second chances. What was kind of the reaction from some of the Republicans on the committee who run the show, obviously?
I think that folks have been a lot more open to, like you said, a lot more of these criminal justice reform ideas. I think that there's a tendency to, if you will, water the ideas down. However, I think that folks are generally open to criminal justice reform, whether it be voting rights or whether it be letting folks out of prison early or whether it be looking at sentencing guidelines, because Governor Parson said it best. He's not interested in building a new prison, and I think that that's something that the Democratic Party has championed for a long time, being criminal justice reform. I'm just glad that the Republicans are starting to hear the state of Missouri out.
My understanding is that I guess traditionally Republicans have not been for this nationally because they fear if a lot of people get their voting rights back, they're going to vote for Democratic candidates and hurt Republicans. I don't know if that's necessarily true. There could be people on probation who are hardcore Republicans just as they're hardcore Democrats, but I imagine that does come into play a little bit among some of your colleagues, or maybe not. What's your feeling on that?
I hope not. Chairman Shaw, the chair of the Elections Committee, within our first, even I believe before our first meeting, said that he wanted to keep this committee completely nonpartisan. I think that we've accomplished that for the most part. I think you'd be surprised at some of the bills that even Republicans have sponsored in that committee. So Representative Peggy McGaugh sponsored a bill that would allow for no excuse absentee voting. So I hope that overall good ideas are just winning.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Today, good policies winning today.
Well, let's talk about an issue that transfixed the Missouri House. I don't know if it was earlier this month or late last month. It's Representative Nick Shorer's legislation that would substantially restrict abortion in Missouri. There's a lot of things going on in this bill. The main thing is after a heartbeat or brain activity are detected, after like 6 to 8 weeks, abortion would be banned, except in the case of medical emergency. There's no exception for rape or incest. There are various tiers that occur in case that is declared unconstitutional. There's also like two-parent notification and a whole other things that we talked about extensively on Representative Shorer's podcast. I wasn't there, but it seemed like this was a very tough debate for not only Missouri Democrats, but for everybody. Because I've been following abortion rights policy for a long time. I've never seen legislation like this. This is probably the most restrictive abortion legislation bill I've ever seen come through Missouri, especially past a chamber. And if it ends up passing and being signed into law, this is going to make national news. So with that as a wind-up, what was your impressions of this legislation and being part of this debate?
You know, Jason, even when you explain all of that right on top of each other, it still takes my breath away. This is the first time Representative Walker said it on the floor. This is the first time that this, I believe her word was draconian set of laws has all been in place at one time in one state, and it's really no way to know what's going to happen with the folks in the great state of Missouri when this is all implemented. I don't pretend to be an expert on the issue in any way, shape, form, or fashion. However, I did stand up and speak briefly on the floor. I just told the story of my mother when she was a young teenage single mother, and how she had to deal with again, to use this word, heart-wrenching decision, I'm sure. And I trusted her, and I think that we as legislators should trust women in the state of Missouri to make decisions for themselves. I think that a lot of the amendments that were added to the bill, whether it be two-parent notification or whether it be the tiered laws if Roe versus Wade is ever overturned, I think that it's just if you go back and look at the floor debate, there were huge issues with not only the bill but every amendment that was added, and I mean, this is one of the issues where the voice vote was clear. The Missouri House feels that it is within our rights to make decisions for Missouri's women.
This is probably one of the issues where, as a Missouri Democrat, like, your influence is, I don't want to say non-existent, but you probably do feel pretty powerless, because I don't think that there's been a Republican who supports abortion rights elected to the Missouri legislature since 2006. And now there's 115, 116 Republicans, and there were 3 Democrats that ended up voting. So is your feeling as a member of the House as a way to combat this just by speaking up and hoping the Senate Democrats are strong enough to filibuster this? Like, I'm just trying to ask you, like, what is your strategy when you're so outnumbered on this issue and it seems pretty hopeless on its face?
Yeah, so that's our job in the House is Missouri Democrats right now, is just to speak our piece and to say it as loud as we can and try to get the message to as many folks as we can. The Senate has a little bit more power, or a lot more power, in terms of stopping things that are I think that a lot of things that go through the House are bad, but we as House Democrats try to make things less bad and try to speak out on things and try to convince our colleagues on the other side of the aisle why we think they're bad, and tell our constituents and the constituents of the state of Missouri why they're bad.
So I'm going to play a couple clips right now. One of the most notable things about this bill is there is no exception for rape or incest. And I asked Representative Nick Schorer last week about that. This is what he had to say on our show.
Allowing somebody to terminate the pregnancy and kill a child at 40 weeks or 38 weeks, regardless of, that child's value to the parent, that child's value to the nation, or to everyone in general, is the same, whether they've been conceived out of wedlock, out of any other form. But that's what I try to speak with Representative Butts about is, look, this would not prevent, number one, would not prevent anybody from getting the immediate care that they need. And if for some reason they don't, and you're past that 8-week mark or the 14-week mark, there is an exception in there for medical emergencies. And as the courts have defined in other cases and in other states, the medical emergency exception could also be linked to whether somebody's suicidal or has mental health emergency. So it's not just physical health, it could be mental health of the mother as well. But me not being a doctor, I'm not one to put those type of findings, those medical emergencies, what they would be defined as. I think physicians would have to take that on a case-by-case basis. But like I said, in stark contrast to what's happening in New York and Virginia and New Mexico, we want to stand for life. We want to stand for the life of the unborn.
You probably heard that argument a lot on the floor. What do you make of Representative Schorer's comments and the rationale for not having a rape or incest exemption?
So I won't attack Representative Schroer's comments, but what I will say is that I have never been raped, and no one has personally shared their experience that I know of being raped with me. However, I can imagine that is a experience that no one would ever wish on their worst enemy. So with that being said, a pregnancy would only compound the amount of stress that a person would be going through, and to expect them to make a decision early on if they would want to keep or want to continue a pregnancy to potentially bring a life into this world, or if they would want to end that pregnancy, those are just too many decisions that I as a man would never be or faced with to even make a decision on. And again, that's why I just trust women to make their own decisions, especially when they're healthcare decisions.
I asked Governor Mike Parson last week if he, I assume he hasn't read the bill line by line, but if there was anything that he would want to change in the bill, including putting a rape or incest exemption, this is what he had to say.
Yeah, you know what, I think that's a work in progress. We all know how the legislative process works. You know, we want to see how this gets through the legislature, how it gets to the Senate. But, you know, when it gets to the governor's office, we're going to take a look and see what's in there. But the main thing is we're trying to protect the unborn and be pro-life in this state, and I think we're setting an example by doing this.
So what message would you have to send to the governor, who has sent out tweets saying he supports what the House does? He's presumably running for another full term next year, and this issue could be something that he showcases to voters. What message would you have to him as he has to decide whether to sign or veto this bill if it passes the Senate?
You know, that's a difficult question for me, Jason, especially kind of going back to one of your earlier questions when you spoke about the role of House Democrats. Really, we can just speak out as much as we can about the issues that we have with the bill, but most of the time it makes little to no difference. So I would just encourage the governor to read the bill and to speak with victims, to speak with folks who are pro-choice advocates, and to make his decision accordingly. And I encourage the people of the great state of Missouri to pay close attention to the decision of not only the governor, but the House and the Senate.
Let's talk about another issue that's affecting your neck of the woods in particular, the potential merger between St. Louis and St. Louis County. Now, this is an issue that is kind of bubbling up kind of away from the legislature, but the legislature is obviously taking notice of it. In particular, there's a lot of angst, I think, on both sides of the political aisle about the fact that the group pushing the city-county merger, known as Better Together, is taking this to statewide voters as opposed to just in the city and the county. And there have been several legislators who have put forth like a competing constitutional amendment saying you can't merge the city or the county unless it's a local vote, essentially. There's different variations, but that's basically the crux of this. The reason I'm asking you about it is I know from doing a lot of research and from talking to a lot of political leaders where you represent, which is primarily African American, that there's been decades-long opposition to a city-county merger because there's a fear that it's going to dilute African American political representation. And as a relative newcomer to politics, but probably somebody who is talking with these political leaders often, I'm interested to hear your perspective on the concept of a city-county merger in this particular plan and how your constituents are reacting to it.
So my constituents are overall opposed to the Better Together plan. I will say that I have some constituents that are open to consolidating different municipalities within the 85th district, a vote to unincorporate in, I believe it was.
I think it was you're talking about Uplands Park.
Yes,
I think that was
Uplands Park
I think that was 2013,
yeah,
if I'm not
just
mistaken.
Just a few years ago, only failed by a few votes.
It was very close.
So folks are paying attention to the issue. Overall, again, folks are against Better Together. I don't know any elected officials, with the exception of any or many or proponents of the plan, with the exception of Mayor Cruson and County Executive Stanger. I'm opposed to many things in the actual plan. I think the devil's in the details if it will actually dilute representation in legislative bodies. However, in executive positions, I think it's all but guaranteed, in the sense of there's 20 mayors in the 85th district. You will essentially, I will use this quote loosely. Someone in my a person that is in local government in my in the 85th district actually said you'll essentially make the mayors of these municipalities park supervisors and trash collectors.
And I just want to explain to our listeners what that means, because under this plan, cities lose a lot of power to do a lot of things. They can't have a police department. They can't have a municipal court. They can't, they can only tax very specific things. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the tax that is done essentially for more general governmental operations or for police or whatever get directed to the metro city. I do want to play devil's advocate, though, because one of the main selling points of this from the Better Together is the fact that they will be merging municipal courts and police departments. Mm-hmm. And I think you know this from growing up in is it basically mid-county? Is that what you call it? I don't want to call it North County because I know people get persnickety about that.
So I grew up calling it North County, but historically it's been mid-county, and I you know.
My point is there's some police departments in your district that have bad reputations for particularly ticketing African-American residents, even though they're African-American-led governments. And the argument is that consolidating the municipal courts and police departments may lead to more high-quality police protection for everybody. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so I think that that's also one of the recommendations of the Ferguson Commission report, which I think is sneaky. And there's a lot to be said about the problems, not only in the region that I represent, the 85th district, but in the region overall, right? But to have a bad plan that addresses some problems personally, I don't think that's because this isn't just a plan for the next few years. This is a plan for the governance of the St. Louis region for here on out until we come up with a new plan, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think that just correcting one problem, even though it may be a big problem in our region, just correcting one problem, throwing a entire system, bad form of government at it is not the right approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to get back to the African-American representation part a little bit and kind of flesh it out a little bit more.
Sure.
So the proponents of Better Together are saying that since there's a larger council of 33 people, then you would be able to elect more African-Americans to that council through districts presumably in North and parts of South St. Louis, as well as North and Mid-County, which I think is certainly possible. Right now, the county council only has 2 members. I don't know how the lines are going to be drawn, but I could see 10 members, maybe 12. But what you were kind of getting at, and if you look at other cities that have merged, like Indianapolis, Nashville, and Louisville, merged city and county governments, not a single one of them has ever elected a black mayor. So they also say, you elected, St. Louis County elected Wesley Bell, and the county's only, 25% black. So that's kind of more of an observation than a question. But I think that the issue is the executive leadership of this new city would, by the percentage of white versus African American, likely be a white person as opposed to an African American, and they would hold a lot of the power. I would imagine that's part of your concern.
That's a part of it, but I think that even when you speak about the legislative branch of this proposed metro city, I don't want to relitigate Clean Missouri, but it all goes back to the devil is in the details and how you draw the lines. We could have 10 to 12 members on in the legislative branch of this new government, but if the proportions are about the same than that they are now, then does that really do us much good? If the Black Caucus in the new form of government is essentially the same in that it is in the county, or even smaller than it is in the city right now, then did we really move the scales of equity forward any?
Well, you could also form a coalition with the Republican members, similar to what's going on in the county council.
Right.
But let's not go there. But let's talk about practicality, like what legislators who don't like this can actually do. Because, you know, Representative Lakeisha Bosley has put forward a constitutional amendment, as I just mentioned, requiring this to be a local vote. I think there's been others who have too. But my feeling is that there are a lot of people in Republican leadership that like this idea. I don't want to say that they like this idea only because Rex Sinquefield is probably funding it. They may actually like it because they like the idea of consolidation. But let's be honest, Rex Sinquefield is a major donor to Republican politics and to some Democratic politics as well. So the reason I mention all this is, does this kind of create kind of a pessimistic path to actually put a competing constitutional amendment? And it just may be up to people like yourself to just try to vote it down in 2020 if it makes the ballot. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think that we have to address the Better Together proposal from a number of different angles. I think that Representative Bosley's House Joint Resolution is a good avenue. I've co-sponsored her proposed constitutional amendment. I support the Municipal League in their pursuit of creating a Board of Freeholders process, even though we know there's some flaws in that plan.
Well, like the fact that Stenger and Cruson appoint most of the members, and
Yeah.
they could just torpedo that process to make sure there's not a competing plan.
Yeah.
But continue.
Yeah. So I think that all of these approaches are necessary, and I also think that that there's a number of approaches that we have yet to see.
We'll have to see into the future. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @jrosenbaum. How would people follow you on Twitter or any other parts of the World Wide Web?
Oh, Jason, I am a longtime listener, and I'm supposed to know my Twitter handle, but I don't.
It's
Windham
85.
That's right.
Because I checked beforehand.
Thank you, Jason.
You're very welcome. Okay, since you are a longtime listener,
I think that my millennial card just got revoked there as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, Twitter is kind of terrible anyways, so we'll let that slide. As a longtime listener of the show, you know that we have different outro music every week. And you told me before the show that you had a suggestion. Your colleague, Representative Rachel Prouty, had a very seminal song by Juvenile that she picked.
Yes.
What is the song you want me to play you out to?
So I am prepared for this question, Jason, and it is The Spinners.
We'll be back next time. Until then, so long.